Alright, so the Vega 64. So this card, the reference card was extremely loud. It was a blower style design. It looked nice. It had that tachometer on it that showed the load, just like the R9 Fury X liquid cooled card. And actually, the Fury Tri-X did have that too. But anyway, Vega 64. So this was the flagship. It launched in the summer of 2017. So it came out late to the party. It used a dual 8-pin. And this particular card, there was a special edition model that had like LEDs on the shroud here. This one doesn't light up because it's the standard one. But the special edition from Sapphire did have an additional 8-pin power connector. You can see the spot of where it would have gone, but mine doesn't have that. So anyway, you can see on here 2 HDMI and 2 display ports. Strangely enough, they went with 2 HDMI and 2 display. I think the only reason why I could think they did that was because of the Oculus Rift. The first Oculus Rift was HDMI based, so they thought that people going into VR would want to use one of these. 3 display ports is definitely better than 2 display ports, and you really only, you only really need 1 HDMI. So yeah, I didn't like that about this card. So this card did have a BIOS switch, so you've got your dual BIOS right there. You have a connector for controlling RGB fan, or I guess not necessarily RGB, but you had a fan header there, so you could control a case fan off of the graphics card. You had another one here on the front. You can see that I got a lot of dust on my card. I did get a lot of use out of this because this card was from 2017, basically until Radeon 7. So basically a whole year and a half went by where this card was really having to hold down the fort until the Radeon 7 came. And the Radeon 7 was a little bit too late too, because it really only was able to match the RTX 2080 at the time. So it wouldn't have been like a whole, almost another 2 years, nearly 2 years until the 6000 series launched. But anyway, let's take a look at this Vega 64 and see how it stacks up with a current modern lineup, and we'll see if it's worth either keeping this at 1080p or if you need to upgrade. Alright, so now that I've got the Vega 64 in here, just wanted to show real quick this Nitro glow, because this is kind of where, this is the era when graphics cards started, I guess graphics cards manufacturers like the AIB partners started putting RGB on all their graphics cards, especially the higher end and enthusiast class cards like the Vega 64. So you can see you've got like the ability to change the LEDs. They finally started putting their logos and stuff on the front, although MSI had been doing that for a while. But Sapphire got theirs. You can change the color. So I've set the color to be white, and then we've got like a kind of like a golden reddish, almost like a pinkish color on the top. So you have 2 light zones. You have the zone up there with the logo, but the power cable's in the way. So you got that, and then you have that. You can kind of change the color. So if you wanted to set them to, say, blue, like the classic Sapphire, or red, like Team Red, or if you wanted to go Team Green on Sapphire, you could do that too. So you can go green. I just kind of set it to white, and just leave it like that. So that looks pretty good. So we'll just leave it like that. Alright, so let's get into the benchmarks. Okay, Elden Ring. Now right off the bat, I'm hearing a lot of coil whine, because just like with the previous graphics card, there was a lot of weird texture loading, and you can see, I'll show you guys real quick, it's happening on the SSD again. You can see that orange light is blinking like crazy, constantly loading stuff. Game assets or whatever are constantly loading in. That is just an Elden Ring thing. I don't really know what else to say there. But it seems like this is the one game that I have that seems to do that. And I think that goes a long way into explaining why there's so many weird, like, latency spikes and stutter with this game. But right off the bat, I can tell already that this feels way, way smoother than the Fury. And there's that weird asset stutter to loading in for that first initial mount there. But anyway, you can see the Felly goes in. Alright, let me get off. Let me help. Let me fight fair. Oh, that wolf got me. Where'd Nefelli go? I don't know where she's at. Anyway, yeah, I got so immersed in the game just now that I completely forgot that we're benchmarking. So bottom line is Vega doesn't have any of the weird stuttering problems that Fury had, or any of the older cards. And I have a feeling that the reason why it's so much more playable on this graphics card, because this is a significant jump. Like, I wish we had the FPS numbers to show you guys, but trust me, like, the smoothness is there. Like, I don't feel that weird, like, you know, I don't feel the weird stuttering that I saw in the Fury. And I have a feeling it's because this is a supported graphics card. Like, this graphics card is still getting the latest and greatest driver updates. And it has the optimized driver for the game, whereas the Fury and the older cards did not. And I think that's probably the answer. I think that's probably the reason why the game runs the way it's supposed to run. Like, honestly, playing the game right now, I can't tell the difference between playing it on this Vega 64 or on my 6900 XT. Okay. Why is the sound so high? Is it... No? Okay, anyway. Are we on max settings? Yeah, so we're max settings on this game. People are probably wondering, like, why are you testing this game? This game is not that graphics demanding. Well, I mean, we showed in the earlier videos with, like, the HD 7970 that this game gave that card a run for its money. Mainly what this is supposed to demonstrate is modern single-player JRPGs from 2022, because that's when this game came out. This game came out earlier this year. Came out right around the time when Elden Ring came out, but it was definitely overshadowed when Elden Ring came out. But yeah, it's basically solid 60 all the way at 1080p on the Vega 64. So I feel like I probably should have included some more MMOs or something like Bless Unleashed, or you know, some Korean MMOs or something like that in a test case. Now, I did see it dip for a second. I don't know if that was some kind of texture load in or something, because I'm not able to replicate that. It's usually this bridge is where I would see... Oh, there we go. There's some dip there. But you see, that's so infrequent that I feel like it's a non-issue now with this card. And that might also be indicative of the engine of the game itself. So anyway, so let's move on. This game is basically solid 60 on the Vega. So let's go to the next one. Alright, and I wanted to show another thing. So the other benefit of being on Vega compared to the Fury is now we're on supported drivers again. So you can see we're on the 2022 drivers. Even though these are beta drivers, they are... The driver date was March of this year. And there are newer ones, I just haven't upgraded them. But I've kept these on here. And for those wondering, I didn't bother to do any DDU. You don't need to do DDU every time you change your graphics card. There's no reason to do that. Especially, even if you change vendors. Like, even if you go from Team Green to Team Red, or Team Red to Team Green, you don't need to remove the drivers. I never do that. I never have any of these problems that people always talk about. I don't understand what people do with their computers to cause them to get these problems. I'm not saying that I'm perfect or anything, but you don't need to do that, because especially if you're benchmarking, it makes it way easier to just like swap between the two. Like I still have the old driver that's the legacy driver for the, you know, the 7970, the 290X, and the Fury. They're all on the same driver from May of last year. But then Vega and the newer cards are going to be tested on this driver from this year. So that's another benefit of being on Vega as opposed to Fury, or Fiji rather, because that's what it was codenamed. So running around here, and you can see we're already like way over, so we're over 100. So this is the sort of thing where it's like, do I still have GPU-Z open? Should not have closed that. Just keep it open so we can see like what we're running at. So you can see the GPU temperature in this game with uncapped frame rate is 73, memory temperature 64. I'm reading the hotspot, so it's actually 59. Core clock is, let me zoom out a bit so you can see everything. I don't know how well that's displaying on the screen though, it seems kind of blurry to me. But if we look up, the clock speed is like over 1500. Memory clock, that's HBM2 memory, there's 8 gigs of that. Fan speed 37%, 1200 RPM, so it's very quiet, it's whisper quiet. And then there you go. So zoom back out. So Vega is kind of old, but for 1080p gaming, I feel like this card is kind of still the sweet spot for 1080p. It's interesting because when the GTX 1080 came out, that card really touted 1440p, and I feel like for the most part you can still run Vega and the 1080 at 1440p, and you'll be fine in most cases. But I feel like if you have them on 1080p monitors, or if you got them secondhand, or if you got them later on when, you know, something newer was the latest and greatest. Like for example, if you bought a 1080 like at the end of its lifespan, like right when the 2080 came out and you bought a 1080, or you bought a Vega 64 when they were on clearance after the mining crash at the very end of 2017, at the beginning of 2018, or I guess, you know, like in the second half of 2018 when Vega was still being sold, you could have gotten one relatively easily for like $399. When RTX 20 series came out, you could have gotten a Vega 64 like this one for relatively cheap, and for a 1080p monitor, right? Like you're not on a 1440p monitor, so at the time it seems like overkill. But if you look at the numbers there, we're at like 160 FPS. It's doing really, really well at 1080p. So I feel like this is where I would definitely cap the FPS down to 60, so that the power consumption drops dramatically. If we look here, now our GPU chip draw is, what is that, 40 watts? Wait a minute, let me make sure we're not that we're not limiting the FPS when we alt tab out. And you can see like your GPU power draw is literally 48 watts. Let me fly around. It's not really changing. You can see where it dropped off. It was at 200 something watts on GPU power draw when it was uncapped frame rate, and now it's at like 44 watts. So less than 60 watts for Final Fantasy XIV at 1080p on a Vega 64. So that's pretty efficient. That's very efficient. It's kind of a weird way to use the card, but it is a good way to get a lot of mileage out of the card when playing MMOs that don't really require like more than 60 FPS, like this for instance. So like now the card's basically sipping power while maintaining a max 60 FPS all the time. So, and we're out in the world where it would typically drop. So that's pretty good, I would say. I personally would be using Vega 64 for 1440p, but in today's era, where like the newer games are more demanding, because this is not one of the newer games, but this is a popular game that a lot of people play. So this definitely represents a real-world scenario, because this is one of those games where you go back to time and time again. And it's more graphically demanding than your typical esports game. So hopefully people understand where I'm coming from when I'm testing this game, and why I'm using this as a test case as opposed to something like, you know, Assassin's Creed or some brand new game like the latest Battlefield game or those sort of things. Because I feel like you could also play those games at 1080p with this graphics card at like high or maybe medium settings, and you'd be fine. Well, actually, I think in the case of Vega and 1080, you'd probably be fine with like very high settings in most cases. Maybe not in the latest games, but you know, it's at 1080p resolution. It's definitely doing really well. So let's move on to the next game real quick, and then I think we're probably gonna know pretty quick here where this card stacks up in terms of should you upgrade or not. Alright, so Monster Hunter World. This is going to be the last game that we test because Monstrum Nox and Neo 2 are already going to be solid 60s. I can already tell because the Fury basically was solid 60 on Neo, and it was pretty much the same thing on E's Monstrum Nox. The only like bridge you would see it dip to like 59, but you know, this card's definitely, with the newer drivers and stuff, this card's definitely going to surpass that by a large margin. So let's just look at Monster Hunter. So 100 something FPS, 100 over FPS at 1080p. Man, I almost feel like, yeah, if you're on this card at 1440p, you're probably fine. Alright, conclusion time for the Vega 64. So, it's pretty easy. If you're playing on 1080p and you have one of these for 1080p for some reason, even though this card is really more suited for 1440p, in 2022, I think that's not so much the case anymore. I think it is okay to be running a Vega 64 on a 1080p monitor, whether that's 60 Hz or higher, like 144 Hz, for example. With one of these, I think you'll be fine. I do think that I feel like this is how I would summarize it. If you're on Vega 64, you don't have to upgrade if you're going to stay on 1080p for high refresh rate. Like, I think you're totally fine sticking around with Vega, even going into next year. I feel like this card has stood the test of time. It's really good. Uses a lot of power, yes. But this particular card has no issues. It's super quiet. It's got a big beefy cooler. It can handle the heat. It can handle the power. This standard model only has the dual 8-pin, so you know it's not like it's a triple 8-pin, which is kind of a problem. Yeah, there's not a whole lot to say. All I gotta say is you gotta have a really good power supply to run this. Ideally, some kind of supernova from EVGA, like a 1600 watt or a 1200 watt Corsair HX. You won't have any issue with transient 20 millisecond voltage spikes, which are what can draw up to like 500 plus watts in a tiny little millisecond like that. That can cause a typical PSU, like an 850 watt or lower wattage, to just straight up shut off because of overcurrent protection. So I will throw that out there. That's probably the one drawback of going with this card at a 1440p resolution. If you're on 1080p, you're less likely to see those massive spikes at the lower res because it won't be as demanding on the card. So bottom line is Vega, you don't need to upgrade, but you have the option. So I would say it's optional whether you want to upgrade later this year. There's really no point in upgrading to 6000 series with this if you have one of these. At this point, it's so late in the game that I feel like unless your card dies or has some issue where it's artifacting and it's out of warranty, or you bought it from like an Ethereum miner or something for cheap, or you bought it off of Craigslist or eBay for cheap, hopefully you didn't overpay because, you know, there's no reason to, especially now with GPU prices falling, then it makes sense to get a 6000 series card like the 6750, for example, would be a really good upgrade for this. Or even like the 6950 XT if you want to go to the top of the line and then not have to worry about upgrading for another 3 to 5 plus years. I feel like this card is going to be 5 years old this summer, and it's still relevant today. It's still really good. You know, it was the king of a lot of memes, but it's held up pretty well. So that's Vega 64. Now, where does that leave the other cards? So, oh, one more thing about Vega. The drivers are still supported. So you still have driver support. So again, that's further reason why you don't have to upgrade. It's not an EOL. It's not an end of support card. Now, where does that leave the other cards? So, first off, 7970 or 280X. This card, you need to upgrade. This card is too old. It's not supported. It only has DirectX 12 11.0 feature level, so you can't run newer games that require higher levels of DirectX 12, like for example Elden Ring. You can't run Elden Ring on this card. There is a workaround with GitHub, but you know, that's kind of iffy because if they patch the game, you know, it might break that DLL bypass for DX11 and then it won't work anymore. So then you're back to square one. So things like that are the reason why I would definitely recommend upgrading now. I wouldn't wait if you're on a 7970. I mean, you've had a 7970 for so long that you might as well upgrade now. Waiting for next gen isn't really going to matter because you're just going to sit on like a 6000 series card for another decade. Or if you go with RTX 30 series, same deal. The reason why you can't really go to RTX 30 series is because they're still overpriced compared to the 6000 series. So I definitely recommend getting something like a 6750 XT as a worthy upgrade for this, huge upgrade for this, or even a huger upgrade, which would be like a 6950 XT. So if it was me, and if I still had this, I would go with like a 6900, like you know, this Sapphire one, for instance. I would go with one of these if I could get one, or if not, I would get the Sapphire Pure that a lot of reviewers have done reviews on. I know Steven Gamers Nexus reviewed that card, and he said it was really good, and he praised the cooler, and it's because it's Sapphire. You know, I've been saying forever that Sapphire is really, really good at making graphics cards that last very, very long. They have very, very good cooling. So, and Steve from Gamers Nexus pretty much echoed that sentiment. So anyway, so you have a 7970 or a 280X, you definitely want to upgrade relatively soon. It should be relatively easy if you're going to stick with Team Red. There's a lot of options right now, and they're at pretty good prices. Even some are below MSRP, so you can actually get them on sale. 290X, unfortunately, it does perform, or fortunately, it performs much better than the 7970X, or the 7970. However, just like the 7970, it does not have driver support anymore. It's loud, it uses a lot of power. It lacks a lot of the advances that things like the RX 480 have. But this card basically is the same performance-wise as an RX 480. So where does that leave people with this card? If you have this card, you need to upgrade now. You don't really need to wait. For the same exact reasons that the 7970. With the one caveat being, technically with this card, this is DirectX 12 12.0 or 12_0 feature level. So you can play the newest games like Elden Ring with this card, but keep in mind that it is going to run pretty poorly, and that goes down to it being a legacy end of support card. So there's no proper driver support for Elden Ring and newer games on this card, so there is that, and that's probably the biggest caveat why I would recommend upgrading now, while the cards are available, while mining is basically in the dirt. So yeah, we don't know what's going to happen at the end of the year. We know there's new graphics cards coming, but we do not know if bots and scalpers and mining people are going to gobble up those cards day one, making it impossible to get graphics cards again. That's the reason why I feel like if you're on a 290X, you probably owe it to yourself to look at upgrading right now. There are really good options in the 6000 series, so I feel like it's probably definitely worth looking into. Alright, so next we have the Fury. So the Fury is interesting because it performs significantly better at 1080p than the 290X, to the point where it's almost to the point where it's totally fine. The only reason why I would recommend upgrading now is because there is a lack of driver support, because it's a legacy card. Unfortunately, Fury was the card that basically got axed too early in my mind. When I found out that they dropped support for this card, for Fiji, I was actually kind of shocked, because it's really not super old. You know, it came out in mid-2015, so it's old, but it's not like super old. So the fact that there's no more driver support for this card, I feel like the reason why AMD dropped support is because they probably didn't sell a whole lot of these, and they probably didn't even make that many of these, because it is using the first gen HBM. So it is what it is. Unfortunately, if you have one of these, you probably want to upgrade now for the exact same reasons that I just mentioned for the 290X. So yeah, it's a good card. It's underrated, and I feel like it was treated unfairly when it came out. I feel like part of that was AMD to blame, because AMD kind of touted it as a 1440p card, and I never really saw it as that. I feel like it's a really good 1080p card, and even in today's world, if it still had driver support, I feel like it would still perform pretty well at 1080p. That's going to be it for that card. Alright guys, so that's basically it. There's no reason for me to showcase the 6900 XT at 1080p. It's going to be complete overkill. If the Vega 64 wasn't already enough at proving that, I don't know what else would be. But anyway, that's it for this little mini series of videos on how these cards perform in 2022, and should you upgrade if you have one or not. Hope you guys enjoyed this video series. It took a lot of effort to make. Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed that video. This video series on the should you upgrade in 2022, now or wait. And I will see you guys in the next video.